Sorry to be running a little late. Okay, a little water. Anybody streaming? You are, Mario?
I believe.
Okay. All right, well, good morning. Andy, you come on up. We've got Andy Kahn here from Crime Stoppers, Executive Assistant Chief Finner, Assistant Chief Heather Morris. I want to just thank everybody for your patience this morning. Sorry we're running a little late, and thank you, Andy, for being here, and thank you, Crime Stoppers, for everything you do. I'll go over some comments, then I'm going to turn it over to Andy from the Crime Stoppers, and then we'll go ahead and open up the questions, okay? So as you know, this morning we're going to talk a little bit about our homicide rates. As you know, here in Houston, our homicides are up significantly. They're up about 44% year-to-date as of this morning. And this is not a unique situation to Houston. It's sadly in this very unprecedented year that we're having as a nation with COVID, the economic downturn, and a lot of the other issues facing our nation. It is a phenomenon that we are discussing across the nation at the major city chiefs. As you all know, I'm the president of that organization. And just yesterday, we had a conference call with the Police Executive Research Forum, because we're finding that it is not just impacting big cities, it's also impacting mid-sized cities and to an extent the entire nation. And it's something that we'll continue to explore, not just with our colleagues across the country, but obviously with our subject matter experts in academia and social scientists and others. So I asked the homicide major assaults commanders to update me on the rise in violent crime in the city, particularly the almost 45% increase in our homicide rate. The year-to-date numbers I'll share with you are unofficial, and obviously they're fluid, but they are what we know at the moment. Murders with a known crime element are up in two significant areas in 2020, and that includes, compared to 2019, that include two areas that I think we know is a challenge in most big cities, and that is gang crime and narcotics-related murders. We have had 16 more gang-related homicides and 25 more additional narcotics-related homicides year-to-date. And this is not a surprise. Like I said, we've been talking about these areas for a while. In 2019, documented gang members accounted for 25 of our homicide victims. In 2020, documented gang members have accounted so far for 57 of our homicide victims. 21% of homicides with an identified suspect are committed by a person known to the victim. This could be an acquaintance or a family member, and this equates to about 75 out of the 350 homicides. In about one-third of all homicides, 34%, the victim either argued with the suspect at the time of the homicide or the victim was involved in illegal activity. Some of the illegal activity involved robbery, selling and buying illegal narcotics, and fighting. And that's about 118 of 350. Numerous known homicide suspects were out on bond, parole, or on probation at the time of the murder. That includes about 20 known suspects out on bond at the time they committed murder. And that's what we have so far year to date. The couple of the more egregious examples we'll talk about in a little bit after I make my comments, after Andy speaks. Now, there's good news. Our family violence-related homicides are down 2020 by a total of 7 homicides, from 42 to 35. But here is a problem. That is really not that's good news, but there's really bad news that accompanies this, because I think that's a matter of luck and not necessarily a matter of the criminal justice system working well. Our family violence Part 1 crimes are up 31%. 31% family violence crimes committed by firearms has increased 41%. So family violence are up 31%, family violence committed by firearms up 41%. And every one of those 41% increase that did not result in a death is a potential murder. And if we don't take those seriously, which we'll talk about later, it's a murder that was avoided, but it's a murder that eventually will happen if we don't take those kind of crimes, those attempted crimes, seriously. We currently have about a 31% of our cases of aggravated assault SBI Impeding breath and deadly weapon, that's again an increase in family violence, which is a big challenge. And reports of weapon charges, including unlawfully carry of a weapon and possession of firearms by a felon, is up 23% year to date. So that means we are catching these felons, these convicted felons, that are unlawfully carrying and possessing firearms. Those cases are up 23%. And we know that they're carrying those firearms. They're not carrying them for looks. They're carrying them to be able to victimize members of our community and other criminals. We've also seen in the news covered by our media partners, there's been a 33% increase in road rage incidents in 2020, 6 of which involved a homicide, as compared to 2019, where there were only 4. The locations vary, but it's important as we talk about road rage incidents that the peak time frame is broad daylight from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., which is pretty much a commute time here in Houston. Lastly, this again, we're talking about firearms. Last year, year to date, we had approximately a little under 200 homicides involving firearms year to date last year. This year, we have approximately 300 homicides involving firearms. And the other piece involving firearms, I think, is one of the elephants in the room in our country is suicide by firearms. It's something that's being talked about across the country, that suicides have become a big challenge with this pandemic and the psychological and economic impact that it's having on our country. And so before I continue with my comments and then open up the questions, I want to invite Andy Kahn, our partners from Crime Stoppers Houston, to make some comments, and then we'll make some additional questions, and then I'll go into Spanish and take it to questions.
Before questions, just a quick clarification.
Yeah.
I think it warrants clarification on the numbers that you just presented. 75 out of 350 have a connection to a gang. 118 have a narcotics connection is what you indicated. Can you clarify really fast? Are there any overlaps there?
There could be, but the narcotics activity, that's what was going on, was actually a narcotics type transaction when the crime occurred. Okay?
Thank you.
Of course. That's a good question, Mara. What's up?
Thanks, Chief. My name's Andy Kahn, Director of Victim Services, Victim Advocacy of Crime Stoppers of Houston, and we're proud to be partners with the Houston Police Department, as with all area law enforcement. We are in the midst of what I've been calling a Harris County bond pandemic. And I've been tracking murders now for almost the past year that have occurred, that have happened by defendants who've been released on multiple felony bonds, bond forfeiture, had motion to revoke bonds that were denied, and or a PR bond. I am now up to 68 people who have been killed. Of the 68, 41 so far in the year of 2020. The criteria was simple that I used. If you were released on a bond, a felony bond, and you were charged with murder, you did not make that list. In order to make the list, you had to have a combination of being released on multiple felony bonds. You had to have been released on a PR bond. You had to have a bond forfeiture that was reinstated, or you had to have a motion to revoke bond because you didn't apply by your conditions and it was denied. In last week's Monday's 7 cases that were involved, one of them involved an individual now charged with murder by the name of John Parfait. John Parfait was given a felony PR bond October 23rd. 2 weeks later, Danielle Bradley was shot and killed. One of the defendants that is now a person of interest in the murder of HPD Sergeant Rios had also been out on 2 bonds. One of them was a PR bond. For over a year, he was in non-compliance. Nobody knew or nobody did anything on it. From our perspective at Crime Stoppers, many of these cases, yet tragic, were also utterly preventable, because what we are seeing and that we're trying to get people to talk about is the revolving door at the courthouse that continues to release offenders, felony offenders, violent offenders, time after time again. There has to be a point where you realize that the bond scenario isn't working. It used to be in days in the past, it was one bond per customer. You were released on a bond, you were charged with another crime, guess what? You weren't getting back out again. That's not happening right now. And the fact that we don't have data, we don't have any statistical information, which Crime Stoppers has been asking, particularly from Harris County Commissioner's Court, we need to know the following information. How many defendants released on felony bond have been charged with additional crimes? How many felony defendants released on bond are in bond forfeiture and their status is unknown, their whereabouts are unknown? How many felony defendants have been released on bond, had violated their bond, but the motion to revoke bond was denied? I can tell you several of these cases here involved when the district attorney's office has submitted motion to revoke bonds, but they were denied, and then weeks later, someone paid the ultimate price for that. 68 people so far, 41 in 2020. This is collateral damage of what we are seeing of bond reform. And it's high time we recognize that the revolving door at the courthouse is playing a major significant role in the increased crime rates, and our failure to recognize that shouldn't be happening. This should be a nonpartisan issue. We should all be aboard in trying to obtain this information to see what is working and not is working. And from someone who has served on the board of the Houston chapter of Parents of Murdered Children and Surviving Family Members of 27 for 27 years, I've seen the numbers of people increased in the meetings twofold. And just last week, we had our first meeting since COVID. We had several families that attended for the first time, and one of them, Carlos Hernandez, was a 23-year-old murdered by two defendants who were released on felony PR bond. One of them was released on a PR bond, while on a PR bond was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, a firearm, and aggravated assault. Instead of revoking his bond and doing what we should have done, putting him back in custody, they gave him yet another bond. He was out on 3 bonds. Now is charged with capital murder of a 23-year-old. And I can't tell you, looking into that family's eyes and telling I'm sorry for what happened to your family member, but quite frankly, it should have never, ever happened, because the individuals charged in Carlos's murder shouldn't be on the streets to deal with. And that's tough as a victim advocate to deal with. So I will be continuing to keep these numbers. I will continuing to track. And keep in mind, I'm only tracking murder. God only knows what the rates are for other violent offenses like aggravated robbery, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, felon in possession of a deadly weapon. And we need to start finding out what these numbers truly are, because I'm of the opinion, Crime Stoppers of the opinion, if we can get a grip on what's happening at the courthouse in continually releasing offenders, you will see a significant reduction in crime. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And for our Spanish media, estamos aquí hablando de los homicidios. Sabemos que este año, desgraciadamente, con lo que estaba pasando en este país, en todo el país, en el mundo entero, con el COVID y la economía y todo lo que está pasando, que hasta este día, hoy, tenemos más de 100 más homicidios este año del año pasado. Gracias a Dios, lo que estamos viendo, que la mayoría de estos casos son personas que conocían al sospechoso, personas que están involucrados en las drogas, en el narcotraficante de drogas, y personas que están en las pandillas. Y también sabemos que los homicidios de la violencia doméstica siguen, aunque han bajado un poquito los homicidios con la violencia doméstica. Sí sabemos que los asaltos en la violencia doméstica con armas de fuego han subido este año, y eso es algo que lo tiene muy preocupado. También lo que está pasando, que estamos muy preocupados, es que tenemos muchos sospechosos que están cometiendo crímenes con armas de fuego y entran por una puerta y salen por la otra. Y como dijo Landy Kahn, que eso es un problema. Y también personas que están abajo de la fianza, y en vez de hacer lo que tienen que estar haciendo y perseguir las órdenes de las cortes, no lo están haciendo y desgraciadamente siguen en las calles y están cometiendo más delitos violentos en nuestra comunidad. Estoy muy orgulloso que nuestro alcalde, Mayor Turner, and I'll say this in English, this is where it's kind of new, I think Mario will understand, but not everybody else, que el alcalde Turner y el concilio nos ha dado más fondos para poder combatir el crimen violento aquí en esta ciudad. El jefe Finner y sus colegas y todos nuestros investigadores tenemos más fondos de la ciudad para poder investigar y también para tener más oficiales en las calles por los próximos 2 meses que sigue este año. Al fin del día necesitamos el apoyo de la comunidad. Tenemos que, número uno, tenemos que apoyarnos unos a los otros, tenemos que ser buen testigo y más importante, si sabe algo, por favor, llame a la policía, llame a Crime Stoppers, porque sin la ayuda de la comunidad no podemos combatir el crimen como lo queremos combatir. Y acuérdese que el criminal que toma una vida hoy de un vecino puede ser un criminal que puede tomar la vida de su miembro de su familia, porque ninguno de nosotros vivimos en una isla. And so what I added in Spanish, and then we'll really open it up to some of the questions, some of the discussion, is we're very fortunate that Mayor Turner and our city council has provided additional funding to help us increase our, not just our patrol footprint, our street crimes units that go out and try to combat violent crime and actually do combat violent crime every day, but also our investigative surge in terms of our investigative capacity. And we're very fortunate that at a time when in other cities they're defunding the police and have fallen in love with that concept, that our mayor and our council understand that the people of Houston, especially people that are most impacted by violent crime, which unfortunately is communities, disproportionate communities of color, black and brown communities, and poor communities, including poor white communities, don't want less policing, they want better policing. And I just want to just say that we appreciate the mayor and the council's support in terms of the additional resources. The department will continue to focus our surge in terms of our patrol assets in 5 to 6 of the hardest hit areas of the city, but understanding that displacement can occur when we increase our patrol assets in our area, that we will continue to monitor whatever the trends are to actually for Chief Finner and his folks to be able to redeploy and move our assets and keep chasing the bad guys. The other issue is, again, our investigative surge with our investigative divisions, that the additional overtime dollars are being used to be able to, put more boots on the ground in terms of the investigative process. Let me just add one last thing. Again, I mentioned early on, this is a very unique year. I don't think we're going to draw too many conclusions from a year like this year where there is no norm. This is, if nothing else, has been a very abnormal year in Houston and across the state and the nation as it relates to the impact of COVID. We cannot be dismissive of the psychological impact, the economic impact that COVID has had with the shutdowns and everything else. And now we're ready for another potential shutdown across the country as we see the COVID numbers increasing rapidly that can actually have another impact. And quite frankly, we are a little worried across the nation as police executives and leaders because there's a lot of fatigue about COVID. There's a lot of fatigue, and that really impacts the psyche of the American people and puts a lot of pressure on us. So, ¿qué ibas a decir?
Hablando del COVID, y rapidito, ¿qué le puede decir a la gente, sobre todo que en estos momentos se siente amenazada por dos bandos, por lo del COVID y por los crímenes, la gente que está allá afuera que anda con drogas?
Sí, bueno, para empezar, acuérdese que, mira, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. Así nosotros los latinos, nuestra mamá y nuestros papás nos enseñaron eso. Si estás metido en drogas o en pandillas o estás con mala compañía, hay más chance que puedas ser víctima de un crimen violento y especialmente el homicidio. Pero al fin del día, la oportunidad de un extraño que te va a matar en esta ciudad es todavía bien bajita. Tenemos que, número uno, respetar a nuestros familiares. Número dos, darnos de cuenta que muchos de estos homicidios son personas que empiezan a discutir y alguien tiene una pistola, sale con la pistola y mata a la persona. Y muchas veces es un colega, es un vecino, es un familiar. Andar con arma de fuego arriba de su cuerpo, y si va a estar tomando, si va a estar discutiendo, no lo haga, porque hay muchos crímenes así que están pasando este año. Por el fin del día, tenemos que saber quién son nuestros vecinos, quién son miembros de nuestra familia, y tenemos que, usar la cabeza. Ok, what else?
Yo tengo un follow.
Sí.
La DA, la Fiscalía acaba de llamarnos a nosotros y decir que están buscando aquellos bares que están violando las reglas de sanidad en estos momentos. Hay bares que están nada más vendiendo una hamburguesa con papas fritas para tener un license de restaurante. ¿Ustedes cómo están haciendo para estar ayudándole a la Fiscalía para que esta gente esté en regla? Porque se están saliendo la gente no está usando mascarillas, están usando...
Sí. Mira, el problema es un balance. Tenemos tanta violencia en esta ciudad y es un departamento que tenemos los mismos 5.300, 5.000 policías, 400 policías de hace 20 años atrás, con menos fondos para el overtime, mucho menos. Vamos a tratar de ayudar, pero tenemos que avanzar. Todo es un balance. Al fin del día tenemos muchos colegas con los constables del condado y vamos a pedirle al fiscal, voy a hablar con Kim Ogg esta tarde para ver si, con todos los fiscales, con los constables, para ver si pueden ayudar con asistir con ese enforzamiento. Porque para mí nosotros tenemos que estar, enfocado en la violencia, más que nada, es la violencia. Pero si tenemos el tiempo, también vamos a enforzar esas regulaciones.
Sí, también una pregunta me gustaría hacer.
Well, this is the first press conference really turned into all Spanish.
I was going to ask you to translate what you just said about the constables and the meeting
Oh,
you're having with the
Okay, remind me, Mario. Let me get him, and then I'll go to you.
VA. Taking notes, Chief.
Okay, thank you.
Some English, Chief.
Yeah.
Es una pregunta, Chief, de también una problemática que nos han hecho saber nuestros televidentes, la comunidad. Habla usted de la falta de policías también. Un problema muy grande, que también ya se lo presentamos al congresista Al Green, es la prostitución en el área de Bisonet.
Sí,
Recibimos reportes, yo en lo personal, me gustaría mostrarle un video que salió al aire,
sí.
en donde se ve a las 3 de la tarde los maestros están saliendo de la escuela. Y
Sí.
¿Se está trabajando en eso? ¿Se han hecho operativos?
Seguimos como operativos, pero acuérdate que el problema es dos cosas. Número uno, nosotros antes, el descarado que el hombre que está yendo a la prostitución, nosotros antes poníamos las fotografías en el periódico para que el periódico del Houston Chronicle ya no lo quieren poner, porque hay víctimas. Esas mujeres son víctimas y seguimos tratando de enforzar eso con nuestros colegas, con el DA's office y con los colegas privados que están trabajando en eso. Pero al fin del día, si no podemos coger los hombres y llevarlos a la cárcel porque están entrando en un lugar por una puerta saliendo a la otra, y ahora con el COVID tienen que darte cuenta que cuando le vamos un arresto ni van a la cárcel, le dan una multa y para afuera van. Es un problema muy grande pero vamos a seguir adelante, y tenemos también que trabajar contra el traficante que está traficando a estas mujeres. El año pasado Kim Ogg tuvo un caso que usó una ley que nunca está usada, que creo que le dan 40 años en la prisión al sospechoso que estaba traficando a estas mujeres. Pero sí sé dónde está eso y vamos a seguir trabajando con la comunidad. La comunidad tiene que ser nuestros ojos y nuestros oídos. Por favor, llámenos, díganos lo que está pasando, denuncie para poder tratar de trabajar contra esa clase de crimen.
Chief, real fast,
Go ahead.
can you say that in English first off, the part about Ogg and the constables later on today?
Yeah, in Spanish, I was asked by, forgot who it was, over here. What's your name again, sir?
I don't know, sir.
I forgot. We were asked about, he said that Kim Ogg had indicated that she's concerned about a lot of the bars that are basically, supposed to be, I believe, 51% of food before you can operate as a restaurant under TABC laws, that a lot of bars are just serving like an appetizer and trying to act like they're a restaurant when they're not, and that the mask laws are not being enforced, and that's really camp run amok. What I said in Spanish is that we're trying to focus on violent crime, and it's a balance. When you have a department that has basically the same number of officers that it had 20 years ago, with a significant decrease in overtime, and with a a significant approach to criminal justice by the rest of the criminal justice system that Andy Kahn addressed, where if you would have told me that someday I'd be in a major American city and violent criminals would be getting out on personal bond and in Texas and $100 bonds, with murderers are getting out on going in one door and out the other, I would have said you're crazy. There's no way, not in this country. But that's what's happening, not just here and across the country. And so it's a perfect storm. So we'll try to help. But what I do want to do is I'm going to call Kim Ogg and discuss it with her, and then we're going to get together and try to see if we can get the constables to help us with that, because we really want to try to focus our efforts on combating violent crime. There's a lot of fatigue as it relates to COVID, and the last thing we want to do is create more dissension and distrust and lack of cooperation from the community if we become focusing more on the mass instead of focusing on people getting shot in our city or robbed or being victimized by violent criminals.
Is there a meeting today? Just want to clarify, because in Spanish you said there was a meeting this
But
afternoon.
I'm going to call. So I was going to call this afternoon.
Got it.
Yeah.
And the other point that they said in Spanish was with regard to the Constitution. I'm missing that. You're the school, and then you were critical of the Chronicle for
Well, you have to realize that one of the things that I'd said in Spanish is that Kim Ogg's office did pursue some real significant charges against one of our traffickers, one of our pimps. I think it was last year, where the guy got like 40 years in prison. It was a significant lick, and I want to commend her for going after the actual pimps and the traffickers. But if we can get rid of the demand, if we can impact the demand, we might be able to really reduce the supply, because there's no business. And one of the things that we used to do is we used to publish the John's photos to shame people, but a lot of progressive newspapers care more about the Johns that are out having these women that are being beaten, drugged, their future stolen, care more about the Johns than the victims. So, being progressive should be about doing the right thing, not coddling criminals and not putting Johns above women, that when we've walked that strand, we've come up to these women and they are beaten. You can see the bruises in their eyes. These are our daughters, and shame on any newspaper that cares more about Johns than they care about women, about our daughters, about our nieces. Futures are being stolen in this city and across this country because the media, these papers, are more worried about Johns than victims. And we're not going to treat these women that are victims, we're going to treat them like big crooks. We're going to try to get them help. But the problem is that as long as there is a business market out there, you know what? We're going to have these crooks that actually are seducing these young girls online, promising them the world, and next thing you know, they're being trafficked. And I know I'm a little emotional on that, but it's very frustrating. We're living in a time where it seems like people are more interested in the bad people and their rights and not in the victims. I mean, that's the elephant in the room, right? We're upside down in this country right now. We care more. Criminal justice reform needs to start with the victims. I became a cop to keep people safe, not to have murder suspects going in one door and out the other, and then the media do a story, singe in there, about how homicides are up with no mention about the rest of the criminal justice system. I mean, where about the rest of it? So we've got to be holistic in terms, and we have to be system-wide in terms of the way we approach these issues. It's very frustrating because the tools in our toolbox that we have are limited. You're out there. These young women are being trafficked. We were out there on a march in Bissonnette. And we walked up to these young women. Do you remember?
Yes.
Bruised. You know what? The Chronicle may care more about the Johns and embarrassing them, but I care more. But I care more about the women. It's just heart-wrenching. We've got to do better by victims. Anything else?
Chief, yeah, real fast.
What are you doing?
Probably numbers that Andy gave, back to the murders for a second, 41 to 68. Andy, is this the first time you've given these numbers to the media?
Oh, Lord, now he's going to be a reporter. let me deal with the reporter first. Let me tell Mar.
Chief, you talk about the emotional frustration. It's also for the victims and the families out there in the city of Houston.
Yeah.
And many families. We've talked to them. And I know you've seen the reports. This said, on October 19th, you and the mayor stood before the city and said we're going to put $4.1 million towards an initiative to combat violent crime and the homicides. At that time, there were approximately 300 murders for the first 9.5 months of this year.
Yeah.
Since that time, we have seen more than 50 murders since, or about 50 murders since. Are Houston taxpayers getting their best bang for their buck with this initiative, considering the rise of nearly 50 murders?
Well, I think the question you have to answer is, that you might not have an answer to it, is how many murders there would be without that initiative, right? One of the most difficult crimes to actually prevent is actually murders. I mean, they happen behind closed doors. They happen, we don't just get to go inside people's houses. But regardless of what the numbers are today, one of the things that I can tell you is that they'd be worse without the additional resources. One. Two, you can't just spend that $4 million overnight. COVID is not just impacting our community, it's impacting our workforce. Our numbers are up in terms of our own people, and I don't have the numbers with me today, but I can get them for you, Mario, where our folks are not being able to work. So that's the $4 million investment, but we haven't spent that money.
Strategy right.
Of course.
You're behind the strategy,
Yeah,
even though we've seen
absolutely.
50 in the last month.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because without the addition, because we know historically, when you increase your footprint in an area, violent crime goes down. Okay?
But it hasn't gone down since
Be-
We need to verify those.
So I don't know your numbers right now, but Mario, what I'm trying to tell you is that,
numbers, Chief.
let me finish. We regardless where the numbers are at, without that initiative, I can tell you this, it would be worse. Okay? One. And two, we also have to look at solvability of these crimes. We're talking about being able to solve crimes, especially murders. If you live in a neighborhood or in an apartment complex and you witness a murder and you're seeing time and again that the murderer goes in one door and a day or two they're back out, our level of cooperation is quickly going down. People are afraid, and they should be afraid. So I think that the investment has to be not just in the policing and the additional resources in terms of patrol or investigations. We also can't have 1,500 murder suspects charged with murder. They're waiting 3, 4, 5 years. Kim August talked about this. We have to invest in prevention programs. We have to invest in patrol. We have to invest in investigations. But we also have to invest in our entire criminal justice system to get these cases moving. Witnesses go away, memories fade, and quite frankly, when you have over 1,500 charged murder and that's just suspects, charged murder suspects, that's just murder. It starts exacerbating the entire problem. I heard Sheriff Gonzalez this morning talk about how long it would take. It would take a couple of years if we didn't have another arrest, another case, just to try to catch up. So we have to invest beyond the police. We have to invest in prevention. We have to invest in prosecution. We have to invest in the courts. But there's a lot of work to be done.
Law and there's order, and we understand that.
Yeah.
But the first point is the law.
Yeah. Well, I think I've already answered the question.
Department doing to shift the manpower to make sure that they can solve these homicides?
I can't hear you.
What is the department doing to shift the manpower to solve these homicides?
Yeah, well, we have actually added more investigators to homicide. We have given that division whatever they've asked. We're actually spending a lot of the overtime dollars are being given to the investigative units so they can spend more time on their cases. And so with that surge, we hope that we will be able to get that done. But again, keep in mind, people do risk versus gain analysis. We all do. It's human nature. If I live and I see a murder, our solvability will continue to go by the wayside if we don't have our number one force multiplier at the table. And that's the public. It's easy for us to sit here because I don't think any of us here probably live in a high crime neighborhood or in a high crime apartment complex. But how likely are people to cooperate in a environment where it's a cyclical door? And let me just be real clear. We've got a legislative session coming up, and one of the highest priorities of law enforcement is bond reform. And I think with victim advocacy groups, it's bond reform. I don't care about cash bond stuff. That's not my bailiwick. But we need to have a tool that is a risk-based tool and make decisions on bond based on behavior and risk. Risk of flight, risk of reoffending, and risk to public safety, because it is broken right now. And it's not just Texas, it's the entire nation that we've really kind of a little bit of muck on that. And Mario, I think you can't get your true bang for the buck if we don't have the rest of the system working. Because if we make an arrest, which we're making an arrest, and they go in one door and out the other, it's just it just doesn't work.
You can create a federal task force. You can partner.
Well,
So this says
yeah.
because of gangs, because of narcotics, you have federal laws that you can lean on there.
Oh,
Have
yes,
you
we
reached out?
absolutely.
Have you
We
talked about creating a task force right now?
we have quite a few task forces going. As a matter of fact,
Crime surge?
well, yes, we just announced a new team with ATF to deal with gun violence. We started our crime gun task force about 2 years ago that wasn't here. So we just added another squad about 3 weeks ago when we added them. And so, yeah, we continue to surge. We've actually met and talked to not just Patrick, but also with the AG. I've actually met with William Barr and the major city chiefs, and we've asked them to take on additional cases. I'm happy to say, I don't have our numbers here, but we can try to get them.
When did you meet with William Barr?
We met last month in New Orleans. So we've talked to them and urged the Attorney General, not just here in Houston, but across the nation, to take on additional cases. And they have added additional prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Harris County, in our region and across the country. And we're hoping they continue to take on cases. Let me tell you, without the ATF's partnership, the FBI's partnership, and the DEA's, and leveraging those resources in our DPS partnership, you saw that DPS is going up to Dallas. Well, we already work very closely with DPS here across our region. We've been working very closely with them for quite a few years now, and thank God for those state and federal resources.
Chief, I've got a quick question if you don't mind. So first of all, can you just say the narcotics was, or the gang members was 57?
You want me to repeat them?
Yes, please.
Okay. Want to go to which one to?
When you were giving the initial,
Okay, so we have 60 more gang crime related homicides that we've identified so far. 25 additional narcotics so far.
that would be year over year? Like
Yeah,
last year?
year to year. 25. I'll give you this after too, St. 25. Last year, of our victims were gang members. That's up to 57 this year. And 75 out of 21% of the homicide so far that we've got suspects going. 75 out of 350 is committed by a person known to the victim. And about a third, the victim argued with the suspect at the time of homicide or the victim was involved in illegal activity. And then Andy gave some of the bond stuff. Do you want anything to add, Andy?
Harris County Sheriff's Office is in the same region, dealing with one of the same issues with civil bond reform, and many of the other issues you just mentioned. Their solve rate is at something like 84%.
Yeah, I saw that today. Well, I'm gonna have to visit with them to see what their factors are, and their solvability factors, and what kind of homicides you're talking about. You can't compare numbers to numbers without knowing what kind of cases they're working. But Ed Harris and I are pretty tight, so I can tell you one of the things they have is some of our retired guys that have gone over there and continue to do a phenomenal job. But you know what? There's ebbs and flows. This is 1 year. We're confident that as we continue to build the expertise of our homicide division, that we've got a lot of young, enthusiastic men and women in there, and continue to invest in the additional resources, we'll come out stronger next year. So, all right.
One of the things that we, or that as a investigated in that story that you referenced earlier today, was sort of just a change in the way the homicide division kind of sends out investigators, or how they manage just the nuts and bolts of investigating those cases and who it goes to, when it goes to them. Do you stand by that sort of model that you put in place since you came in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I haven't had any feedback that I don't micromanage our folks. They're happy with it. And so far, like I said, this year is an anomaly of a year, but you cannot make conclusions from 1 year of data. We'll just have to see how we move forward. But again, we are an evolving agency. We're a learning agency, and we will be visiting with Ed Gonzalez to see what their homicides, what the nature of the homicides, what the solvability of the homicides. There's a lot that goes into that. So.
The clearance rate that you're referencing to, obviously, in talking with Sheriff Gonzalez, you're saying that this is a year that's different from all others, and COVID's not really the motive. Other things are motives here, narcotics.
Yeah, no, but COVID has played a role. Yeah,
In certain areas,
yeah.
but it's not the whole motive.
No, absolutely not.
So this said, when you look at the solvability rate, and the stats do show, Chief, the solvability rates, the clearance rates.
Yeah, it's down. Yeah.
They're down. And even in a city like New York, because I spoke to the NYPD last week, they're at 390 murders as of last Friday. Their clearance rate was 86%. How can we not have that type of clearance rate here in the fourth largest city in America?
Because we are, for quite a few years here, we've been talking about here, before I got here, the degradation in terms of our staffing, our overtime, our technology. But you asked a question, you don't let me finish. And the fact that we're falling behind in a lot of areas. One of the things that we're excited about is we think with some of the investments that the mayor just approved recently, we'll be able to start leveraging more technology. If you go to New York City, Mario, and you look at their technology, their analysis, the resources that they have in terms of being able to combat crime, it is pretty much 22nd century in terms of their ability to connect videos across the city. I can just go down the line, and unfortunately, we have fallen behind. You either have.
Likes being second to nobody.
Say again.
This mayor likes being second to nobody.
Yeah, but this mayor has what's called the revenue cap that the rest of the state hasn't had to deal with, but they're going to be dealing with it here, I think, starting next year. And they're going to learn what it's like to start every budget year 100 million plus behind. It is, at some point, you get diminished returns. Having said that, we're not going to make excuses. We're going to continue to do our very best to make a difference. But it starts with the community, and it continues to the law enforcement, and it goes to the DA, and it goes to the prosecutors, it goes to the judges, the courts. Then we got to look at the parole system as well. So we've got to take a hard look because this is not just happening in Houston. I know everybody's trying to act like it is. It is something that's happening across the country. And remember, I meet with these guys and ladies on a regular basis. And so we've got to see how much of this is reform, how much of this is, for us, I know that we've fallen behind. We've fallen behind in staffing, we've fallen behind in overtime. And I'll give you an example. Chicago PD, okay, a city that is about 268 square miles. We're a city of 677 square miles. A city that has about 13,000 police officers. We're at about 5,400 police officers. A city that has provided technology that is, we've toured it, and I mean, we're envious of the technology that they have, because that is a great force multiplier that we are lacking. And it's a city that, on top of all that, their overtime budget was about $120 million. Our real dollars at the beginning of the year was about $7 million. Now we're behind, but despite all that, we're going to continue to do our very best. So again, Thanksgiving is coming next week. I'm going to close with this. I know that a lot of people will be out on the highways. Please, if you decide to go and have a drink, do not drink and drive. We want people home for the holidays, and we don't want them to get killed on the highway, because despite this talk about homicides, we know that the one thing that doesn't discriminate is traffic deaths, and we want you home for the holidays. If you're going to drink, please don't drive. Designate a driver. And with COVID, you might be better off having a virtual Thanksgiving instead of hanging out with people. So be safe, guys, and thanks for coming by.